She was supposed to be gone, erased from the world without a trace. But as the wealthy gathered to bury her, one man saw what no one else dared to believe. She was still alive. A homeless stranger, invisible to society, stood between silence and truth. Why was her voice silenced? And why did no one want him to speak? This isn't just a story about life and death. It's about power, race, and the lengths people go to keep the truth buried. What he uncovered that day would shock everyone and change everything. It was a day like any other, at least for her. Maria was just 19, full of quiet dreams she rarely shared out loud. She didn't have much: hand-me-down clothes, a few close friends, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, her future could look brighter than her past. Every morning she walked the same cracked sidewalks, her steps echoing through a neighborhood where people learned early to keep their heads down. To most, she was invisible, a young black woman carrying the weight of being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. But to those who really knew her, Maria had fire. She believed her life mattered, even when the world told her otherwise. That morning, she had no idea her path would cross with people who saw her not as a daughter, a friend, or a human being, but as a problem. Their power, their wealth, their silence would collide with her existence in a way that would test everything she was. And waiting, just beyond the edge of her ordinary life, was a moment she could never have prepared for. Because when the world decides who deserves to be seen and who can be buried and forgotten, survival is no longer guaranteed.
Maria's walk that morning should have been unremarkable. The sun pressed down, the streets buzzed faintly with traffic, and she clutched her worn backpack close, thinking about her next shift at the diner. But then, something shifted. A black car slowed as it pulled alongside her, its windows tinted, its engine too quiet. She tried to ignore it, kept her eyes forward, but it didn't pass. It crawled, watching. Maria's stomach tightened. She wasn't new to stares, to whispered assumptions about who she was and what she might do, but this was different. The car followed until finally it stopped. A door opened. Out stepped a man in a suit, polished, expensive, the kind that screamed authority. He looked at her the way people looked at things they already believed they owned. "Do you belong here?" he asked. The words weren't loud, but they cut through the air like a blade. Maria froze. She'd lived in this neighborhood her entire life, yet in his eyes, she was already trespassing, already guilty of being in her own skin. Other men climbed out, each in the same dark suits. They didn't shout, didn't accuse. Their silence was worse. Their presence filled the street with something heavy, something unspoken, a warning.
Maria's breath quickened. She wanted to run, but running would make her a target. She wanted to answer, but her voice felt locked behind the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories just like hers. And then one of the men reached for her arm, not roughly, not violently, almost casually, as though taking her away was a matter of procedure, as though her life could be redirected without question. Her body stiffened, panic shooting through her veins. This wasn't just about her anymore. She could feel it, the power they carried, the assumption that no one would ask why a young black woman simply vanished, that no one would care. She yanked back, breaking free for just a second. Her backpack slipped from her shoulder, spilling onto the ground. Papers scattered across the pavement. She scrambled to grab them, but one of the men stepped on the pages, pinning them to the concrete. "Careful," he said flatly. Not a threat, not a plea, just certainty. And in that certainty lay the truth. Maria wasn't seen as someone worth protecting. She was seen as someone worth controlling.
A neighbor peeked through a window curtain, then quickly pulled away. Another passerby turned down the street. Silence. Indifference. Maria's chest pounded. The men closed in, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. She thought of her mother's voice, telling her to keep her head down, to stay safe. But safety wasn't an option anymore. Not here. Not with them. As one man reached again for her arm, Maria made a choice. A desperate, dangerous choice. She ran. And what happened next would prove that in this world, escaping the grip of power was never simple and never free.
Maria's feet pounded against the cracked pavement, her lungs burning with each desperate breath. She could hear them behind her, the polished shoes slamming against the ground, relentless, closing in. The street seemed to shrink around her, buildings towering like walls, every turn a dead end waiting to happen. She darted into an alley, the scent of garbage and damp concrete wrapping around her. For a second, she thought she'd lost them. Silence, just her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Then, shadows spilled across the brick wall. They had found her.
One man lunged, grabbing her wrist, twisting until pain shot up her arm. She cried out, but the sound was swallowed by the city, by a world too busy to care. He shoved her against the wall, the cold bricks scraping her skin. "Stop fighting," he hissed. His voice wasn't angry. It was calm. Too calm. As if her resistance was nothing but a brief inconvenience. Maria's eyes darted upward. Above, windows stared blankly down, closed tight. No one was coming. No one would save her. Her body trembled, not just from fear, but from the crushing weight of what this moment meant. If she disappeared now, if her story ended in this alley, who would remember? Who would fight for her? The men surrounded her, their suits sharp against the grime of the alley. Their silence was louder than any accusation. It said, "We own this moment. We own you." Maria's chest heaved as tears burned her eyes, but then something inside her shifted. Anger surged where fear had lived. With a sudden burst of strength, she shoved the man holding her, breaking free for a split second. Her voice ripped through the air, raw and unshaken. "You can bury me, but you will not erase me." The alley echoed with her defiance. Phones clicked on from the street. A few bystanders, drawn by her voice, began recording. And in that fragile, dangerous moment, Maria was no longer invisible. She was undeniable. But would that defiance save her or seal her fate?
Maria survived that day, but survival came at a cost. Her body carried the bruises, her spirit carried the scars, and her voice carried the truth. What was meant to silence her had, instead, made her louder. The videos recorded by strangers sprayed beyond that alley, beyond the neighborhood, beyond the city. For the first time, people saw her not as invisible, but as undeniable. But recognition doesn't erase pain. It doesn't undo the fear of knowing how close she came to being erased forever. And it doesn't change the fact that her story is not rare. It's part of a pattern where wealth and power shield the guilty, and skin color determines whose life is protected and whose life is dismissed. Maria's courage forced people to look, but the question remains, for how long? Will the world remember her strength, or will it move on, waiting for the next headline, the next video, the next name to trend for a moment before being forgotten? Because Maria's fight is not just her own. It is every fight of every person who has been told they don't belong, who has been silenced, who has been forced to run for their life simply because of who they are.
And so the impact of her story isn't in the alley where it happened. It's in the conversations it sparks, the outrage it fuels, and the choices we make when confronted with injustice. Her voice still echoes. You can bury me, but you will not erase me. The question is, will we listen? Or will we wait for another Maria before we decide that enough is enough?